Every major event in world history, every major figure in world history appears to be encoded in the Bible.
The Bible codes are a dramatic demonstration that what we have here really is the Word of God and not simply a historical tradition. These 66 books, penned by 40 different guys over thousands of years, are collectively a supernaturally given and skillfully engineered message system.
Ordinarily, we would assume that this building, the U.S. Pentagon, and anything having to do with the Bible would be far removed from one another. But in 1994, Statistical Science, a respected mathematics journal, published report number 3, volume 9, titled Equidistant Letter Sequences in the Book of Genesis. That report found its way to this door.
Harold?
This was the office of Harold Gans, senior cryptographer for the National Security Agency. But now he was absorbed in something else.
You still working on that Bible thing? Your little 386 at home has been crunching numbers for almost 2 weeks now.
19 days, actually. 14 hours and 21 minutes.
Gans knew that equidistant letter sequence was a code form widely used by various governments and their agents. The idea that they would occur in the book of Genesis was hard for him to believe.
I don't know why you're wasting your time. I mean, this thing's either pure coincidence or pure nonsense.
I'm sure you're correct. But Rip designed the original program, and Statistical Science published the findings.
Eliyahu Rips?
Mm-hmm.
He's a world-class mathematician. What's he doing messing with this religious stuff?
Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
He found it so difficult to believe that he wrote his own computer program based on his intimate knowledge of encryption techniques with the intent of disproving the results published by Statistical Science.
So here we are, the agency that cracked the Enigma code, the Japanese Purple code. We've got parallel Cray supercomputers coming out our ears. And our senior cryptologist writes simple equidistance letter sequence codes on a 386. What am I missing here?
Probably the significance of what this means if it's true.
Oh, yeah, all the secrets of the world are encoded in Torah, and only God could have put them there. Is it?
Is it what?
Is it true?
Hang around a few minutes and I might be able to give you an answer.
What was the significance of these Bible codes? Could there be information encrypted in the book of Genesis having to do with people and places that could not have been known at the time the book was written? If the codes were simply a matter of random chance, the Gans program would soon be written. He was sure his wife would soon be calling to tell him his computer had stopped and the p-value, a numeric representation of probability, was a very large number, and that would be the end of it.
Mrs. Gans. Oh, hi. Did the machine stop running yet? What was that number again?
Well?
As a matter of fact, it is true. I don't think I've ever seen value this small before. The probability that these codes could appear by accident it's virtually non-existent.
What Gans discovered that day was that everything was there, just as the study said it was, firmly fixed in the code. He also knew the controversy was just beginning.
I believe the Bible code issue is nonsense from beginning to end.
The overwhelming majority of scientists who have studied the phenomenon have come to the conclusion that there's no basis for it whatever.
We've come a long way since 1450 and Gutenberg's first movable type printing press. Today, this small disc contains the entire Bible. Any passage can be accessed at the push of a button. In just a matter of minutes, everything in the Bible relating to a particular subject can be accessed, collated, and printed out. But you know, for our sophistication and technological skill, we haven't been able to improve on the words. What they say and what they represent remains exactly the same. There is something that has recently captivated biblical scholars and scientists alike, however. It is the notion that there might be something more here than just the words that are on the surface. There is evidence that embedded within the Hebrew letters of what the Jews refer to as the Torah, that is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, or the first 5 books of the Bible, there is a code that tells of events far into the future. A code that, according to some, could only have been put there by the original author, God himself. Some researchers have even suggested that Yeshua, the Hebrew name for Jesus Christ, has been found to be part of these codes throughout the Old Testament. As you might suspect, this idea has generated a great deal of controversy. But then, the Bible's been a source of debate ever since Moses brought down the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai. There have always been those who love it and those who hate it.
All the good from the Savior of the world is communicated through this book. All things desirable to men are contained in the Bible.
If we would destroy the Christian religion, we must first of all destroy man's belief in the Bible.
The Bible is the greatest benefit which the human race has ever experienced.
The inspiration of the Bible depends upon the ignorance of the gentleman who reads it.
It is impossible to mentally or socially enslave a Bible-reading people.
One does well to put on gloves when reading the New Testament. Everything is cowardice and self-deception.
A thorough knowledge of the Bible is worth more than a college education.
The debate continues to this very day. But all other arguments aside, one fact is indisputable. Since Gutenberg printed the first Bible, it has become the most widely distributed and widely read book in the world. Every year, more copies of the Bible are printed than any other book ever published. A recent count put the number of complete Bibles printed in a single year at over 60 million. Another 90 million New Testaments were also printed, and over 1.5 billion scripture sections were published in over 2,000 languages. Amazingly, those numbers keep growing every year. What is there in this book that has captivated the minds and hearts of people the world over for thousands of years? What could there possibly be in the history of a small group of people in a dusty corner of the world that could attract such attention? What is there in the words of these scrolls that has bound a scattered nation together for over 3,000 years? The Old Testament, specifically the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible, is, according to its adherents, a history of God's dealings with mankind and specifically the children of Israel. Yet it is filled with fantastic stories that many scholars insist cannot be true. Was there a series of devastating plagues that overcame the great Egyptian Pharaoh? Did a man called Moses actually receive the 10 Commandments and the Mosaic Law directly from God? Could this same Moses have miraculously opened a pathway through the Red Sea? The critics are relentless. Some even say the Exodus from Egypt never took place and Moses never existed. The words of the Torah, they insist, were penned by ancient Jewish leaders as a mechanism to control their people, nothing more. In a moment, we'll look at these issues through a modern lens and see if recent discoveries in modern technology can provide some answers to these age-old questions. But assuming for the moment that Moses did exist, what are we to make of these new scientific studies that suggest there is more, much more? Today, the question being asked in ever-widening circles is simply, is there information about modern people, places, and events embedded in the ancient biblical text? Is there, in fact, a Bible code? Does this code contain information about Hitler and the Holocaust, about the reestablishment of Israel, the 6 Days War? did it actually anticipate the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin? And can it tell us what happiness or horror the future holds?
I was in Israel to meet with the chief of Israeli intelligence on a totally different subject 6 years ago, and I heard by chance about the work that a very famous mathematician in Jerusalem had done. He had found the exact day that the Gulf War would begin in a code in the Bible. And I thought this was just nonsense. I thought it was absurd. I said, I'm not religious, and began to walk away. Then I checked out this mathematician. Eliyahu Rips is no ordinary person. He's the world's leading expert in group theory, the field of math that underlies quantum physics. He's considered one of the greatest mathematicians in the world. So I went to see him. But in my mind, I was certain that, in an hour tops, I would find out why he was wrong, because this could not be true. There could not be a code in the Bible. No one can know the future. Instead of spending an hour with Dr. Rips, I spent a week with him. And at the end of the week, I knew he was on to something real.
Israeli officials will neither confirm nor deny that information regarding the first Scud attack was derived from researchers involved with the Bible Code. But given the results, it is fair to ask if perhaps science and religion have not, at long last, found a common ground.
3 weeks before the Gulf War began, Dr. Rips and his colleagues in Israel found encoded in the Bible, Saddam Hussein picked a day, enemy, Scuds, and the date, January 18th, 1991, actually the equivalent in the ancient Hebrew calendar.
Perhaps before going on, we should try and answer some of the questions posed by the critics, beginning with the most fundamental question of all: was there really a man named Moses? According to the book of Exodus, at the time Moses was born, the Pharaoh of Egypt had decreed that all male Hebrew children be killed. The mother of Moses, unwilling to follow this horrible edict, put her young son in a basket made of reeds and set it adrift on the river. The daughter of Pharaoh found the basket and took the child for her own son. Moses was transformed from the child of Hebrew slaves to the grandson of the Pharaoh in a single day. But Moses' life in the court of the Pharaoh came to an abrupt end when he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave, and in a rage, Moses attacked the Egyptian and killed him. From that moment on, Moses became a fugitive from the wrath of Pharaoh, which brings us to the beginning of the most controversial series of events in the Bible. Moses fled into the desert to escape the Pharaoh's soldiers. After wandering for many days, he came across a small tribe of nomadic shepherds in what was then land of Midian. He is befriended by Jethro, the head of one of the families, and there he determines to stay. In one stroke, Moses is transformed from Prince of Egypt to wandering shepherd. And so far as Moses is concerned, that will be his lot in life. But it was not to be. One day, while in the desert, he was startled by the sight of a burning bush that, while fully involved in flame, was not consumed. The Lord spoke to him out of the bush and told him he must return to Egypt. Critics are quick to point to this episode as proof the Bible is pure fantasy. Even apart from the burning bush, how could a middle-aged shepherd, who by his own admission was not a good speaker, be expected to go into Egypt, where he was still on sentence of death, and simply tell the Pharaoh he has to give up hundreds of thousands of slaves? The answer, according to the Bible, is a series of plagues that God permits Moses to call down upon the Egyptians. There are plagues of frogs and flies, of the water in wells, rivers, fountains, even urns turning to blood, of boils, dying cattle, and fiery hail. Finally, Moses names the most devastating plague. The firstborn of every Egyptian household will die. And therein lies the problem. Critics insist that the Egyptians were such astute record keepers that something so tragic, so all-encompassing, would certainly have been recorded by their own scribes as well as by Moses. As it turns out, recent discoveries have proven them right.
And there's an ancient Egyptian papyrus document called the Ipuwer Papyrus, and it recounts in eyewitness fashion the plague of blood, the plague of cattle disease, the plague of strange fire phenomena, the plague on the firstborn, the strange darkness, all the events that we previously thought we only knew about from the Bible. We can read about it in Egyptian records.
Given the severity of these plagues, it is not unlikely that the Pharaoh would at last let the people of Israel go. But somewhere along the line, he had a change of heart. And here the biblical record stands alone in its depiction of what many still regard as an unbelievable miracle. Yet except for this miracle, there would be no Bible or the possibility of a Bible code. Pharaoh's army of chariots was rapidly gaining on the slow-moving mass of humanity, trying to make its way across the wilderness of Sinai. Suddenly, they found themselves facing the Red Sea, with the Pharaoh's army closing in from behind. Moses, according to the Bible, raised his arms, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind that provided the children of Israel with an escape route. We can only imagine what a great act of faith it was for the children of Israel to follow the bidding of Moses and rush out into what just moments before had been an impassable sea. The way was open before them, but it was only a narrow strip of land with a wall of water on both sides. Behind them, the Pharaoh's army, bent on destruction, pressed forward. Terrified, but facing certain death, they rushed out onto the narrow bridge of land. It is not hard to imagine the Pharaoh's army coming to a standstill, staring in disbelief at the fleeing Israelites and giving them precious time to complete the crossing. According to tradition, Moses was the last to cross, and by the time he reached the other side, the Pharaoh's chariots and soldiers had recovered from their own fear and surprise and were already pouring out across the land bridge in angry pursuit. Theirs, however, was to be a different fate. The wind ceased and the water rushed in upon the Egyptian army, drowning men and horses alike. But could such a thing really have happened? Oddly enough, it was Napoleon who first discovered that indeed it could.
At this site in 1799, Napoleon's engineers discovered an underwater ridge some 600 feet wide that extended from shore to shore. His engineers calculated the right time for crossing this 5.2-mile strip when the east wind would blow sufficiently to clear the seabed of water. Napoleon, however, barely escaped with his life when a sudden change in the wind's direction brought an onrush of water covering this strip within just a matter of minutes.
Of course, those were 18th century engineers, and their records did little to satisfy the critics. 20th century scientists, however, have taken up the challenge with surprising results. Dr. Doran Knopf, professor of oceanography at the University of Florida, has developed an experiment to test the viability of the biblical account of Moses and the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea.
We were intrigued by the possibility that perhaps there is some explanation for a similar process. So what we did, we developed what we call in physical oceanography a mathematical model of the part of the Red Sea where many people believe that crossing could have been. Okay, what we have here now is a physical model of the Red Sea. The deep part supposed to represent the main body of the Red Sea, which is about 2,000 or 3,000 feet deep. And the shallow part, with the one with the sloping bottom, supposed to represent the Gulf of Suez, which is much shallower. As we said before, the average depth of the Gulf of Suez is about 100 feet. And the length is few hundred miles. Okay, what we have in addition to this, we introduced here an artificial ridge, which you see right here, And the depth of the water above that artificial ridge is only about 10 feet high. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the wind blow from here, and you will see how the water recedes and, in fact, exposes the ridge to the air. Okay, so what you can see now is that most of the water, in fact, to the left of the ridge is blown away. There is still some water there, and you see that there is an exposed area right there. All right? So the idea is that the Israelis crossed on this part of the ridge which was exposed, and they saw water on the two sides, right? They saw the water on the left side of the ridge and the water on the right side. And I'm going to cut the wind off now, and I'm going to do that abruptly, and you will see how it comes back. So let's do that. And of course, what happens after that is when the wind relaxes, the water wants to come back to the position that it had before, and it does that via a gravity wave, which moves at the speed we calculated to be like 15 feet per second or so, which is, of course, a speed that one cannot escape.
Dr. Knopf's experiment demonstrates that the strong east wind could indeed have opened a passage through the Red Sea sufficient for the children of Israel to cross. And as Napoleon demonstrated, once the wind stopped, there could be no escape for the Pharaoh's army. Modern research has shown that it was possible for the fleeing slaves to have crossed the Red Sea at this particular point. But how do we know this is where Moses brought people? Once again, modern technology shows the way, literally. Infrared satellite imaging has tracked a large migration of people, their campsites, and their direction across the Sinai Peninsula with an astonishing correlation to the biblical account in Exodus.
With satellite infrared photography, there have been major archaeological discoveries found throughout the world. There's a trail that comes down the west branch of the Red Sea. The left-hand branch of it comes down to the tip of the Sinai Peninsula, stops there. It appears to come out the other side and then wanders north to the highest mountain in the area, Jabal al-Lawz. And we did find what I think is archaeological evidence. Something took place at Jabal al-Lawz. We found at the base of this mountain 12 pillars, 18.5 feet in diameter. Why not 7? Why not 11? Why 12? With 12 tribes of Moses fitting so perfectly into that scenario. Additionally, on the flat in front of this mountain, we found a large pile of rocks about 24 feet tall. There's a petroglyph of an Egyptian, not an Arabic drawing, but an Egyptian drawing of the golden calf. And additionally, at the base of the mountain, we found kind of a wing-shaped formation, foundation pointing towards the mountain, and there we found marble, round marble stones. This is the stone of it. This rock is not indigenous to that area of Saudi Arabia, let alone to Saudi Arabia. Somebody brought this in a tremendous distance. Something really did take place at this mountain, and it may well have been the Exodus.
All these findings seem to confirm the discovery of the real Mount Sinai according to information provided in the Bible. Could this then be the actual route of the Exodus? Are we now within sight of the biblical Mount Sinai and the miraculous meeting that produced the Torah? Modern technology, it seems, can confirm that there was a man called Moses, that there was a massive exodus of people out of Egypt, and that these people did cross the Red Sea and go into the ancient land of Midian, now Saudi Arabia. But was Moses responsible for this book, the Torah, or what we commonly refer to today as the first 5 books of the Bible? And can modern technology confirm what may be the most fantastic biblical discovery of all time, the existence of the Bible Code? To find the answer to that question, we must first try and determine how the Torah was actually written. This is important because if the code exists, the plain text would have to be the same today as it was when Moses brought it down from the mountain. After nearly 4,000 years of copying and translation, is that even remotely possible? Dr. Eliyahu Rips decided to find an answer to that question, and in 1982 began an intensive study designed to prove or disprove once and for all the ancient Jewish tradition that holds there are hidden messages encrypted in the Torah. It was 12 years before the completed study was published and gained the attention of Harold Gans. Since that study, the mystery of the Bible codes has sparked worldwide interest in the ancient text and sparked intense debate among scientists and biblical scholars alike. But is the idea of some sort of code in the Bible really new? What, if anything, does the Bible itself have to say about hidden or sealed information within its pages?
Haven't there been others over the centuries who have tried to uncover hidden secrets in the pages of the Bible? What, if anything, did they discover? In the next few minutes, we'll try to provide answers to those questions and to what is perhaps the most intriguing question of all. After centuries of being on opposite sides, will science and religion finally come together in a single expression of truth? There are those who suggest they already have.
When you stop to think about it, the Bible is truly an amazing book. It took 1,500 years to complete, 40 different writers contributed to its content in 3 languages, and as we know it today, it contains 66 books in 2 testaments, the Old and the New.
The question that comes immediately to mind is, how could something so long in the making, so complex, and with so many different authors, possibly contain a code of any kind?
There's an ancient tradition among Jews concerning the Torah. This tradition claims that unlike other books of Scripture, the Torah alone was not merely inspired, it was dictated directly by God to Moses in a precise letter-by-letter sequence without punctuation or spaces between words.
Jews and Christians alike have long considered the words of the Bible to be divinely inspired. But this tradition suggests something different, something far more astounding. It suggests that God literally wrote the Torah. And if that's true, then we have to ask, is there any evidence that this tradition has some basis in fact?
Well, we need to understand that in the ancient texts, there were no spaces between the words. Scholars call this form of writing scripta continua. In other words, it was just a stream of letters. You inferred where the spaces between the words occurred. Archaeologists have discovered 22-line inscription this way. This is a pretty well-established fact in archaeology. The spaces between the words as we're used to it apparently were introduced during the days of Ezra, much later, of course, than the days of Moses.
The tradition, it seems, does have some archaeological support. That means that in the 40 days and 40 nights Moses was on Mount Sinai, he was busy writing down, in precise sequence, the entire 304,805 letters of the Torah. The question that jumps out at us, why? What could be the reason for requiring such a strict and difficult construction?
It is also part of the tradition that within the precise sequence of letters, there is encrypted information of a sort that only a divine hand could have placed there. However quaint and absurd that might seem, the tradition has a long and highly respected history. Nachmanides, one of the great Jewish sages, teaching in the 12th century, told his students that all of Israel's history could be found in Deuteronomy 32, commonly known as the Song of Moses. Another outstanding rabbi and teacher who lived and died in the 13th century, Rabbi Bachia ben Asher of Saragossa, Spain, described a process whereby the skipping of equal intervals of letters in the Torah could lead to obtaining divinely ordained information. And in the 18th century, one of the greatest of the post-biblical sages, Elijah Solomon, known reverently as the Great One of Vilna, made the startling claim that all that was, is, and will be until the end of time is included in the Torah. While these are only opinions, they are without question the opinions of some of the greatest Torah scholars of all time. Their influence on Jewish tradition cannot be overestimated.
It seems pretty clear that the idea of some kind of coded information in the Bible, specifically the Torah, has been with us for centuries. Would it surprise you to learn that the concept was not only believed, but actually enlarged upon by one of history's most famous scientists?
Sir Isaac Newton served as provost of Cambridge University for many years and is generally regarded as the first modern scientist. It is Newton who figured out the mechanics of the solar system and is credited with the discovery of the functions of gravity. He was also a firm believer in a biblical code.
Sir Isaac Newton, who was better at it than anyone, said that the entire universe, not just the Bible, the entire universe was a cryptogram, a code set by the Almighty. And it was up to us to unravel this puzzle. And he, of course, also looked for a code that he was sure existed in the Bible that would reveal the future of mankind.
Newton left many of his personal papers at Cambridge when he retired. His biographer, John Maynard Keynes, discovered the papers and was shocked to learn that most of the million or more words in Newton's own handwriting had nothing to do with mathematics or astronomy, but rather esoteric theology. Newton was a firm believer in a Bible code. He was so certain there was a hidden code in the Bible that he spent over half his life trying to decipher it. The secret of the Bible code, if indeed it existed at all, would remain hidden for another 300 years. Ironically, it would be the greatest tragedy in Jewish history that would set the stage for the scientific discovery of coded information in the Bible. World War I had proven that being able to break enemy codes was absolutely vital to winning a war. By the time the Second World War broke out, cryptanalysis, the art of making and breaking codes, was well on its way to becoming a science. A small group of Polish mathematicians had broken the supposedly unbreakable German Enigma code in 1934. When America entered the war, the fledgling U.S. Signal Corps, later the National Security Agency, was able to keep one step ahead of the constantly mutating code, giving Allied generals and admirals advanced knowledge of German strategy. But in order to keep up with the ever-changing code, they had been forced to devise a means of making the large numbers of calculations required. What they came up with was a huge mechanical calculator they called a computation machine. These computation machines made cryptanalysis a viable science. As it turned out, they also gave the United States a huge advantage in harnessing the energy that would change the world.
During World War II, we of course were on a crash program to develop the atomic bomb, which required substantial computation. Dr. John von Neumann at Los Alamos and Dr. Alan Turing, both world-class scientists, collaborated to give us what we know today as the modern computer, both for the atomic bomb and also to unravel the Enigma codes of the Germans.
The invention of the atomic bomb undoubtedly changed the course of world history, but the invention of the computer itself has probably brought about even greater changes.
Rabbi Michael Ber Weissmandl, a childhood Talmudic and mathematical prodigy in Czechoslovakia prior to World War II, survived the Holocaust and after the war emigrated to the United States. Weissmandl, while still a young man, had stumbled onto the notes of the 13th century Rabbi Bachya, suggesting that divine information could be derived from the Torah by means of skipping a specific interval of letters. Now, with all the horror behind him, Weissmandl returned to the fascination of his youth, the possibility of a mysterious Bible code.
Rabbi Weissmandl, through his diligence and determination in his studies of the Torah, made some remarkable discoveries. The word Torah in Hebrew consists of 4 letters, a tau, a vav, and a resh, and a hey, which are equivalent for us to talk about it as if it was a T, an O, an R, and an H. We should note here that the Hebrew alphabet consists of 22 letters that are essentially consonants. Vowels are generally simply inferred. The vav operates sort of what we would consider as an O, but it's not considered a vowel. In the book of Genesis, if you go to the first equivalent of a T and count 49 letters and then take the next one, in other words, the 50th letter, is the equivalent of what we would consider a vav. It's what we would consider an O. You count another 50 letters, it's a resh, or like our R. You count another 50 letters, you come to a or an H. In other words, it's as if you found a T-O-R-H at 49 letter intervals. It spells the word Torah. Rather remarkable in its own right, but one of those things you could dismiss as just a happenstance. But when you get to Exodus, you discover the same thing happens. You come to a T 49 letters plus one, you get to the O, the R, and the H the same way. And so again, this starts to look very designed. In fact, it's rather interesting that this number 50 are the number of days from the Exodus to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. In pursuing this further, you go to the book of Leviticus, the third book, and nothing like this happens. But you go to the fourth book of the Torah, the book of Numbers, the same thing happens, but only if you spell Torah backwards. Kind of weird. You go to the book of Deuteronomy, again you find the equivalent thing, but only if you spell it backwards. Now, you wonder, what does this mean? And you stand back from it all. It's as if those four books are pointing to the middle book, two forward, two back, to the book of Leviticus. So you examine Leviticus more carefully, and you discover not 49 letter intervals, but 7 letter intervals. Every 8th letter, you have the word Yahweh, or the name of God. And you stand back from this whole thing and you realize the Torah is always pointing to the name of God. Rabbi Weissmandel's discovery is the first modern hint of hidden codes in the Bible, and of course has led to using computer to find others. Professor Daniel Michelson at UCLA has estimated that the probability of Weissmandel's discovery happening by accident is less than 1 in 3 million.
This discovery also has great significance to the ancient menorah lampstand, still used in Jewish practices today.
Like the lamps in Israel's ancient lampstand, the Hebrew word for law was encoded at 50-letter intervals in the opening paragraphs of Genesis and Exodus. The Eastern lamps point toward the servant lamp, the lamp of God, which was elevated above the others. Leviticus reveals that servant lamp design with Yahweh, the Hebrew word for Jehovah, encoded at 8-letter intervals in its opening verse. In the ancient menorah, the western lamps were reversed to point toward the servant lamp. Following that design, the word Torah was found to be encoded backwards in the introductory paragraphs of Numbers and Deuteronomy. Just as the lamps on either side of Israel's ancient menorah were ignited from the flame of the elevated lamp of God, these 4 encoded Torahs point to the glory of Yahweh, or Jehovah, in Leviticus.
It was the 50-year-old discovery of Rabbi Weissmandel that finally convinced a small group of Israeli scientists that computers might be the key that would unlock the centuries-old mystery of the Bible code.
It was Dr. Eliyahu Rips, one of the world's leading mathematical experts, who devised the first mathematical model to test the viability of the skip codes Weissmandel had apparently demonstrated. But he soon enlisted the help of Doran Whitsom, a graduate student in physics specializing in general relativity, and Yoav Rosenberg, a brilliant young computer scientist. Together, they hoped to prove scientifically whether or not a Bible code existed. It would be a long and tedious undertaking.
Dr. Rips, in creating the Bible computer program, took the original Hebrew text of the first 5 books of the Bible, the words that, according to the Bible itself, God dictated to Moses on Mount Sinai 3,200 years ago. And all he did to that text was to eliminate the breaks between the words, so that instead of words on a page, it became one long strand of letters, 305,805 Hebrew characters, from the first letter in Genesis to the last letter in Deuteronomy, with no break in words. So perhaps Dr. Rips was restoring the Bible, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, to its original form. In any event, he was not changing the order of the letters. He was just eliminating the breaks between the words. He then programmed a computer to look for really a very simple code that would reveal new information. Skip any equal number of letters, and the new information was revealed.
Perhaps we should take a moment here and explain exactly what an equidistant letter sequence, or ELS code, is and how it's constructed. To detect an ELS code, a computer must first be programmed to write down the first letter of the encoded word, represented in our formula by N.
The computer will then skip a fixed number of letters, represented here by the character D. Write that letter, skip the same number of letters, and write that letter, and so on. Let's try a simple example. Rips explained that each code is a case of adding every 4th or 12th or 50th letter to form a word. Skip X spaces and another X spaces, and the hidden message is spelled out. This appears to be nothing more than a simple description of ELS coding. But if you begin with the first letter of the paragraph, R, then skip every 3 letters and pick up the 4th letter following, the coded message is revealed. What is infinitely more difficult is the creation of a surface text that is sensible and easily understood, and yet will seamlessly accommodate specific letters at fixed intervals. That process is called encryption.
There are several things that have to be understood about the entire equidistant letter sequence coding. Just looking for words, virtually any words, as an equidistant letter sequence, you will find them in the book of Genesis, you will find them in War and Peace, you will find them in virtually any sufficiently long text that you try to find them in, particularly if you're using a computer. In any case, what is found is generally random. You have to apply statistical analysis to determine whether or not what you found is in fact random, or is in fact well beyond what you'd expect to find at random.
The key to statistical significance is how many related terms are found in a small area of biblical text and how many characters are in each term. Short words in lots of text are very likely just coincidence. So if all text can produce words at equidistant letter sequences, what makes the Torah codes unique?
Now, it's amazing. And only in the Bible do you find this. For instance, by skipping an equal number of letters, you spell out President Kennedy. The very next letters in the same skip sequence say to die, and Dallas is encoded in the same place. When you look for Shakespeare, the very next words in the same equal distance skip sequence say, will present plays on stage, and Hamlet and Macbeth are encoded in the same place. You could find Kennedy or Shakespeare in some equal distance skip in any big enough text. If not in War and Peace, look in a big book. Eventually you will find some equal distance skip sequence that spell out the name of any historical figure. But only in the Bible will you find encoded consistently in the same place accurate related information.
In order to test the ELS code theory, the research team created a program according to strict scientific and statistical rules. The usable text would be only the book of Genesis, some 78,000 letters. In order to make certain the results could not be tainted by subjective interpretation, they selected the names of 34 of Israel's most famous and revered sages as the target of their search. To make it more difficult, they also asked the program to search for either the target's birth date or death date. After months of work, the incredibly complex mathematical model and program was ready. Now it was up to the computer. The results of this test startled even the researchers. All 34 names were there, coded into the text with either their date of birth or date of death.
He used statistics correctly, and he found that the information encoded in the Bible was encoded there against odds of 10 million to 1. He looked for the same information in War and Peace and 2 original Hebrew texts, and there found nothing but random letter combinations. Only in the Bible did he find consistent, coherent information against odds of 10 million to 1.
Science, it seems, has the key to unlocking the secrets of the Bible codes. Still, there are those who are critical of the discovery. In Part 2 of Secrets of the Bible Code Revealed, the critics will have their say. Also, you'll find out precisely what the Bible codes have revealed about our day, and if there are codes other than ELS codes in the Bible. Don't miss Secrets of the Bible Code Revealed, Part 2.